Welcome to today's episode of the Psychology Insights podcast, where we'll be exploring why academically talented children often experience isolation and difficulties as adults. This episode contains valuable insights to help you understand these patterns at your own pace. Why is it that many academically gifted children develop into adults who feel disconnected, unmotivated, and profoundly alone? These individuals were once celebrated, rewarded, and told they had limitless potential. Yet somehow that encouragement transformed into a burden. That recognition became a prison, and now many of those same bright children have grown into adults who struggle. They find it difficult to maintain motivation, feel behind in social development, have trouble initiating and completing projects, and struggle to form meaningful connections. Most puzzling is their inability to explain why, because externally, everything appears fine. They remain intelligent and capable, yet internally experience a pervasive sense of separation, as if they're merely spectators watching life unfold around them. There's an explanation for this phenomenon. Gifted children often construct their entire self-concept around their intelligence, and when this happens, the very attribute that made them exceptional in childhood becomes the exact factor that constrains them in adulthood. Let's explore why this occurs, and, more importantly, how to break free from this pattern. This isn't about failure. It's about a survival strategy that has outlived its usefulness. Understanding how you arrived here is the first step toward finding your way forward. During childhood, our identity tends to be straightforward. Children attach to one or two characteristics and build their self-concept around them. A child might define themselves as someone who loves dinosaurs or soccer. It's one-dimensional, but that's how identity normally begins. Simple and based on interests or labels. One of the most influential labels a child can receive is "you're smart." This designation becomes embedded, reinforced by educators, family members, and peers. It becomes fundamental to your self-perception, and initially, it feels wonderful. Being the smart kid provides validation, attention, and creates a path of least resistance. You don't need to work as hard as others. You grasp concepts quickly, and you stand out among your peers. But here's the hidden cost. When you're praised for intelligence, what's typically being celebrated isn't dedication, but effortless achievement. You received praise when you solved problems quickly, when you earned top grades without studying, when you comprehended concepts immediately. Over time, you internalize a dangerous belief. If I'm intelligent, things should come easily to me. This belief quietly undermines everything as you mature, because when something isn't easy, when you struggle, when you fail, when understanding doesn't come immediately, it doesn't feel like a normal challenge. It feels like an assault on your identity, because you think, if I'm supposed to be brilliant, why am I finding this difficult? Rather than embracing challenges, you begin avoiding them. You don't participate unless you're confident. Don't play games unless victory is assured. Don't pursue potentially fulfilling activities if they might reveal you as someone who isn't quite so exceptional. Gradually, your world contracts. You only engage in activities you already excel at. Stay within familiar territory and protect your image as the perfect, brilliant individual instead of exploring new possibilities. That's the tragedy. While others are experimenting, attempting, failing, and developing, you remain confined in a shrinking comfort zone. The longer this continues, the more difficult escaping becomes. Eventually, you realize you've constructed an identity on something increasingly fragile. You can't risk failure, can't appear unintelligent, can't jeopardize the foundation of your entire self-concept. So, you stagnate, and that's when isolation intensifies. Because when you stop growing, you also stop connecting. Think about it. Connection emerges from shared experiences, participating on teams, navigating awkward phases together, or collaborating toward goals. When you withdraw from these situations, when you remove yourself from contexts where bonds form, You miss opportunities that create genuine friendships. You avoid joining clubs fearing inadequacy. Skip trying new sports because they're unfamiliar. Evade group projects because they're frustrating. Without realizing it, you gradually step outside the stream of social development. Yet you still desire connection, so what do you rely on? Your intelligence. You try to understand people rather than relate to them. You analyze, observe, and create mental simulations. This leads to what's called cognitive empathy, understanding others' emotions intellectually without engaging with them emotionally. This approach works superficially. You can navigate conversations, maintain social appearances, even appear charismatic momentarily. But underneath, you're exhausted because instead of simply being present with others, you're constantly calculating, considering what to say, how to respond, what others might be thinking. Social interaction becomes another performance area, and when you fear failing at it, you begin avoiding it too. This is where loneliness deepens. But you're intelligent, right? You should be able to solve this. So you apply logic to emotional challenges. You try to repair self-esteem through rationality, craft arguments to convince yourself you're adequate, overanalyze your behavior, and none of it helps. Intelligence wasn't designed to resolve emotional pain. It's not a tool for establishing self-worth. It's for solving external problems. When you attempt to use it to feel internally validated, it creates an endless loop because there's no intellectual answer to, "Am I enough?" That question can only be addressed emotionally, and for intellectually gifted children, emotional development is often what lagged behind. When emotional distress becomes too acute, when loneliness becomes unbearable, the ego forms one final defense. I'm simply different from others. I don't connect because they're not as intelligent. I'm too profound for superficial relationships. Instead of acknowledging loneliness, you convince yourself you're superior, not because you truly believe it, but because it hurts less than admitting you feel excluded. This is called defensive arrogance, one of the most isolating patterns possible. It creates a barrier between you and everyone else. Even when desiring connection, the barrier prevents you from reaching for it, because genuine connection requires humility, presence, and vulnerability. So how do we address this? The essential first step is abandoning your identity as the smart one. You must release that self-concept. Not because intelligence is negative, but because basing your worth on it is destructive. When your value is tied to effortless success, you'll do anything to avoid effort, failure, and situations that might reveal you're not exceptional. You'll sabotage progress to protect the illusion, which will eventually collapse anyway. The solution is constructing a new identity centered not on being intelligent, but on being willing to evolve. Stop asking, "What will make me appear brilliant?" and start asking, "What will help me move forward?" Stop protecting your pride and embrace discomfort. Allow yourself to try things and be mediocre at them. Show up not to excel, but to participate. Yes, it feels awkward and uncomfortable, like regression. But it's not. It's the first authentic step toward becoming whole. Your former identity suggested your value came from being exceptional. Your new one reminds you that your value comes from being human. Being human means embracing uncertainty, accepting gradual growth, acknowledging confusion, and accepting that you won't know what you're doing half the time. But taking action anyway. Not perfect action, not brilliant action, just honest, imperfect, human steps forward. The process begins with small experiments, trying activities with no expectation of excellence, expressing opinions without knowing if they're right, asking questions when you don't know the answer, admitting when you're struggling. Each small act of vulnerability creates a crack in the armor of perfectionism, letting light into places that have been dark for too long. As this process unfolds, something remarkable happens. The energy you once spent maintaining a perfect image becomes available for genuine growth. The fear of failure that paralyzed you transforms into curiosity about what you might learn. The exhaustion of constant performance gives way to the refreshment of authenticity. So if you feel stuck, numb, or chronically disconnected, if you've dedicated your life to being the most intelligent person in every room, and now don't know how to be anything else, this is your starting point. Release the narrative. Stop trying to impress and start trying to be authentic. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room to belong. You just need to be someone willing to show up, even when it's difficult, messy, or unfamiliar. If you can do that, if you can stop clinging to the version of yourself that needs to remain above it all, you'll begin experiencing something you haven't felt in a long time. Connection. Not because you earned it or deserved it, but because you finally stepped down from the pedestal into the world where everyone else lives. And that world isn't so terrible. In fact, it's the only place where others can truly see you, and, more importantly, the only place where you can finally feel at home. The irony is that when you stop trying to prove how smart you are, your intelligence often flows more freely than ever before. When you release perfectionism, your natural abilities express themselves with less resistance. When you allow yourself to be a beginner in some areas, you often discover talents and passions you never knew existed. If any part of this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns or experienced a realization that you hadn't quite been able to articulate before, leave a comment sharing what stood out. Chances are you're not alone in feeling this way, and sometimes identifying the pattern is the first real step toward breaking it. Thank you for listening to the Psychology Insights podcast. Remember that growth is rarely linear and never perfect. It's a series of small choices, small risks, and small moments of courage that gradually transform into a life of greater authenticity and connection. Take care of your mental health, and I'll meet you in our next episode.